Into this. We'll talk to Chris Cowlin, who is a Spurs fan, who is no doubt amongst those, Chris, who have been voicing their views on Thomas Frank over the course of the last few weeks. We'll talk, first of all, timing. Was last night the final straw?
I think so. Boos at half-time, incredibly loud boos at full-time, and there has been a lot of frustration, increasing frustration from the Tottenham Hotspur fan base over these last couple of months because the style of play hasn't been good enough. Yes, we've had a lot of injuries, but a manager needs to find a way to win, and a lot of the things that Thomas Frank has been saying in press conferences, a lot of people haven't been agreeing with what he's been saying, and I think that this is absolutely the right decision. And the timing, it had to happen. We've got 12 games left now in the Premier League, and I just hope that we get an interim manager in now that does a good job and gets us away from that relegation zone, because Spurs have been slipping down that Premier League table and pretty rapid. And a lot of us were feeling, certainly this morning before this announcement, that you looked at the fixture list and you thought, where on earth are the next points coming from? And we've got Arsenal next Sunday week, and but the results and performances just simply haven't been good enough. So this is absolutely the right decision to call.
Yeah, you've got a weekend off because of not being in the FA Cup. So that might be a key to why that's happened. But the looming presence of Arsenal in the next Premier League game might also be another reason. But if you think about the Premier League form that Spurs have had under their last two managers, it's been pretty poor. We know what happened under Ange Pochettino last year, finishing so lowly as they did. It's pretty much been replicated so far by Thomas Frank. So he hasn't been able to essentially improve on things in the Premier League. Why do you think that that's not happened, given the sense of enthusiasm, no doubt, when he was appointed?
Yeah, I think that when Thomas Frank was appointed, I was certainly one of those people thinking that he was going to bring a real calmness to Spurs and add defensive qualities and be tactically versatile as well. We knew that he played 17 different formations for Brentford last season, and Spurs thought that they were going to get a manager that was going to be very flexible, and he was going to improve players. And I think that it's fair to say as well that this isn't all on Thomas Frank. The board need to deliver better players and more players, depth as well in transfer windows. And the players at the moment just seem to be looking beat before we've even started the game, because the body language doesn't look right. And I just think that, Frank as Spurs boss, it just simply wasn't working. And I just think that now somebody's going to come in and give these players confidence and put some energy back into Tottenham, and hopefully we can climb up that Premier League table. But the transfer windows have been a big issue, and injuries have been a big issue, certainly for Ange Postecoglou and certainly for Thomas Frank. But you've got to look at this squad and you've got to add more quality.
Yeah, from an outsider looking in, it's really bizarre to think what has happened with Spurs over the last year and a half. Winning the Europa League, but failing in the Premier League by the standards that Spurs set for themselves and the fans set for the manager and the players. That's been replicated under Thomas Frank. Poor in the Premier League, but, in the Champions League, immediate qualification for the last 16, in the top 8, and seemingly a completely different set of results. You've watched them. Can you please try and illustrate why that's happened, not just under Thomas Frank, but under Postecoglou as well?
I don't think anyone can answer that. It's one of those $1 million questions. Why does that happen? And Spurs have got an exceptional record. I think the last time we lost in Europe at home was back in 2020 against RB Leipzig. So we've got an exceptional record at home in Europe, but not in the Premier League. And as you mentioned right at the very start, the boos at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We've only won 2 out of 13 home Premier League games, and I think we've heard boos at 9 of those games. So that tells you everything about this season. But as I go back to, the depth, we knew Postecoglou really struggled with injuries. Yes, Thomas Frank has had a lot of injuries, but sometimes managers need to find ways to win. And, I think if you ask any Spurs fan right now, what is our style of play? I think we're all scratching our head, and we're in Feb. And you think that, when a manager comes in, you have an identity, and we're used to seeing the Spurs way. A Spurs manager needs to play a certain way, needs to play entertaining football. We certainly haven't been entertained this season, and it has been boring a lot of the times as well, hence the boos. And, last night at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, there were a lot of seats empty, which said a lot, because a lot of fans just didn't want to go and watch the team play. But as you've mentioned, we're still in the Champions League, so that is a huge bonus. At the moment, we need wins in the Premier League. So hopefully whoever does come in now can guide us and give us that renewed energy that we desperately need right now.
I wonder from a Spurs fan point of view, when does it become a malaise that is deep set more than what a manager can immediately fix, particularly over the course of 8 months, for example, for Thomas Frank? What are the fans' expectations of this team? The players that you have, the 100+ million you spent on a couple of players, appreciate 2 players came in on loan in the summer, and then you mentioned that you didn't enjoy the January transfer window in particular. But given the resources that you have, but the players that you have as well, what expectations do you have of the team? And is it perhaps actually that they need to be reset because of the difficulties you've had, particularly in the Premier League?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the Spurs fan base have been extremely patient in recent years. We've gone through 6 managers since we moved into the stadium in 2019, 3 interim appointments as well. So, the board have made a number of decisions. They sacked Pochettino in 2019, having taken us to a Champions League final, not spent any pennies in multiple transfer windows in 518 days. We sacked Jose Mourinho 6 days before a final. Conte was sacked after that famous rant after the 3-3 draw at Southampton. So we've had a lot. And of course, you mentioned as well Postecoglou being sacked after winning Spurs a Europa League trophy. Our first trophy in 17 years, our first European trophy in 41 years. Some of these decisions have not been good decisions, in my opinion, but transfer windows need to be better. Spurs do have a good squad. You take these injured players out, of course it's going to make a difference, but the players still left, you have to get results. And the expectation, I think, always is that Spurs finish in a European spot. It could go down to 7th or 8th in the Premier League table right now, and Spurs are about 10 points off that. So Spurs should always be in a European spot. And, winning the Europa League in May was meant to be the springboard to more success, us fighting on all fronts. And that was a phrase that was used by the Spurs board at the start of the season.
So when, if you like, was the original issue? Was it all the way back to sacking Pochettino? Was it perhaps giving Postecoglou a little bit longer? What do you think was the original problem?
I think it all stems back to the Pochettino sacking in November 2019. He took us to a Champions League final, as I mentioned, didn't spend a penny in multiple transfer windows. He said at the time that, we've got this great mansion, we need to put the furniture in it. And in my opinion, every single time we have sold or let go a top player, every player that has come in has been of lesser quality, and I mean that very respectfully as well. The transfer windows just simply haven't been good enough. And, we were told when we moved in that stadium in 2019 that the stadium was going to be a game changer and Spurs would be competing, for honours year after year and challenging, for the top trophies. And that simply hasn't been the case.
I mentioned Pochettino because I imagine that you are among many who are considering the idea of Pochettino returning to the club, given the success that he have and given the potential that after the World Cup, where he's the manager of the USA, he could well become available again. He has mentioned himself about a potential return, but now Spurs have themselves a little bit of a betwixt between. Are they going to potentially consider that the long-term issue to be resolved and now try and solve the one with an interim manager from now until the end of the season, a la Manchester United?
Yeah, I would expect Spurs to go out now and perhaps get in an ex-player or two to join this coaching staff and take charge for the remaining 12 Premier League games and, of course, the Champions League games, how many games that will be. But it's interesting you mentioned Pochettino because at the recent away game against Manchester United, the Spurs fan base was singing his name. They were singing his name again last night in front of Thomas Frank. And if you ask the majority of fans who do they want as the next permanent Spurs manager, it will definitely be Mauricio Pochettino. But what I would say to that is you could bring any manager in right now, but the football club need to change. They need to change and learn from previous mistakes. We need to learn from all of the mistakes that we have made in the past. The transfer windows definitely need to be a lot better. And if you were someone like Pochettino having that interview or having that conversation about a possible appointment, his homecoming at Tottenham, he would have 1,001 questions, I'm sure, to be reassured that it is going to be different, because I think anyone looking at the Spurs job, they will be thinking, you've had, great managers in there, Conte, Jose Mourinho, Pochettino. Of course, they'll be looking, Postecoglou won the trophy there, and then he ended up getting the sack as well. So I think that anyone possibly going in at Spurs as a permanent appointment, they'll be asking a lot of questions, and rightly so.
All right, Chris, well, appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed. It's a fascinating subject, and they are a team, really, that allow for a fascinating conversation. We appreciate your contribution to it. That's Chris Cowlin, Spurs fan. In a moment, we'll be talking to Umir Fan, who can tell us just exactly why Thomas Frank perhaps didn't succeed with his style and brand of football. But first of all, this is what he said after the Newcastle game last night, when he was absolutely determined to tell everybody who asked him the question that the boos might have been reflective of what the fans thought, but it wasn't necessarily reflective of what the owners thought, with him saying determinedly that he was going to stay in the job.
And I also understand it's, how can you say, directed against me. That's the easiest way to do it. What I'm also 100% sure about, it's a team effort. It's not only one person. We're all aligned and know what needs to be done. And the next thing I can promise is that I will work very hard every single day to do everything I can to turn around with a lot of other good people.
Turned out to not be the case. Umir Fan, our football tactics correspondent, is alongside me here in the studio. And we heard from Chris Cowlin, the Spurs fan, saying that they spent their 8 months wondering what was the brand of football that Thomas Frank had brought. Perhaps if you could tell us a little bit about what worked at Brentford and what got him the job first, before we talk about how it didn't necessarily work at Spurs.
I think looking back at what Thomas Frank did at Brentford, you almost have a greater appreciation for the player quality that Brentford had. I think that with any manager, if they're going to succeed, they need that player quality to match the tactics that they try to employ. So we know that they like to play direct. And when you think back to players like Ivan Toney, Brian Mbeumo now thriving as the number 9 for Manchester United, Wissa, who went for 50 million to Newcastle as well. To have 3 strikers of that quality, you have to